Hey guys, I'm back like I never left. Now, on today's episode of In Alignment with T.
Welcome back to In Alignment with T, where we take a deep dive into the cognitive, social, cultural, and emotional realities of the human experience. Now, I've been gone for a while, and in all fairness, I do owe you an explanation. I've been struggling with my mental health for the last 3 months, and things have not necessarily been easy. Considering the fact that mental health is the core purpose of this channel, it's quite necessary for me to be direct and very honest about why I've not been available and I've not been around. But I am picking myself up by the bootstraps. I am working through things and I do feel a lot better. And I do believe that I'm at a point where I can be a bit more available for the channel. I did consider giving up on the channel at some point and the podcast, but the truth is, I am still very passionate about this project. I still think it's very purposeful. I still think it's very useful. I still think the discussions that are brought up here are pivotal and can incite positive change, no matter how small. Another reason, aside my mental health, that has caused me to not be as consistent with the podcast and the channel is that I have been working on a new business venture that has taken up a good chunk of my time. I'm also not at my usual filming location, which makes it a bit more difficult to film the videos, edit them, get them out there. Due to time differences as well, because of where I am, it's a bit more difficult for me to schedule a good time with guests to have them on the channel as well. So, in order to make that a bit easier, I also will change the way that I do things a bit. So, I won't be on camera as much so that I don't have to worry about the filming location and I don't have to worry too much about lighting all the time. This does not necessarily mean that, the visuals will not be available or that I won't be on camera at all. It's just something that I'm putting on hold until I have a team that can help me with filming, lighting, and editing in order for me to stay consistent. So, audio recordings are going to be a bit easier for me. Please just bear with me. I am so grateful for everyone who has still stuck around, for those who have asked about me, for those who have checked in. The podcast is still on. I've not disappeared or given up just yet. So let's get into it. Now, I could possibly talk about anything, but in the last few episodes of the podcast and in the last few videos that were uploaded onto the channel, I did discuss quite light-hearted topics. But I think in order to kickstart this part of the journey, I would like to go all the way back to the inception of this channel in talking about the more difficult parts of the human experience. So today we are going to talk about the life and experience of the people pleaser slash pushover, why you can't say no, why it's not your fault, and what you can do about it. Now, during my stressy, depressy, lemon zesty hiatus, I watched a lot of movies and a lot of shows to the point that you could consider it criminal. And one of those films, which happens to be the quote unquote movie of the summer, it caused a lot of buzz, is the movie It Ends With Us, which is a film that was adapted by the book of the same name by Colleen Hoover, who, together with Blake Lively, made the grave mistake of trying to push this film as a romance.
Colleen Hoover, and It Ends With Us is in theaters now. So grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
Now, the truth is, there is a bit of romance in this story, but the most important parts of it have nothing to do with the romance and everything to do with domestic violence. And it explores a lot of themes along with domestic violence that help us answer the why in a way. Now, there are so many ways we can discuss the life and experience of the pushover slash people pleaser. And although this particular case study is obviously on the more extreme end of how the life of a pushover could turn out when they don't put a stop to certain situations at the right time, it does show how growing up in a certain environment can create that type of personality. The kind of personality that might not walk away as soon as they should, the kind of personality that does not stand up for themselves, the kind of personality that makes excuses for others. So, we're going to explore that in this story today. And I'm actually thrilled to have this conversation in case anyone's been struggling with something like that. I am more than glad to give you a perspective that you may have not heard or seen before. Just to give you a bit of a heads up on the format of this episode and the way that I want to break it down, the movie itself plays out, and then there are flashbacks in between from Lily herself to younger Lily when she was a teenager, and just so it gives you like a more cohesive, well-rounded story. And that really works for a movie, but because we are having an episode where we speak about, someone's current circumstances and then the reasons behind it, I think I'm going to talk about her relationships in the now, and then when I'm discussing the why later on, I will bring up her teen years and so on and so forth. And at some points, this will also be interlaced. So I'm just giving you that heads up in case you're a bit confused as the episode goes along. As the official, unapologetic queen of over explaining, I will take it upon myself to lay out the characters and the relationships that they have for further clarity so that as I explain these things, you know who's attached to who, how, and why. So the story is about Lily Bloom, and Lily Bloom is portrayed as an only child who grew up in a household where she would watch her father hit her mother. He would literally pummel her mother in her presence, didn't care. So she was very afraid of him. There are parts of the story where I will discuss her relationship with her mom and how that affects her choices. Lily also has a high school love called Atlas, who also shows up later on in the story and also plays a role in her adult life as much as he did when she was a teenager. Then she has a relationship with Ryle, who is the boyfriend, then fiance, who then becomes her husband at some point in the story, who is the perpetrator of the violence against her. And then she has a friend who is his sister, who plays the role of a very important friend and in law. The film starts with Lily moving back to her hometown to stay with her mom. And the reason for this is her father's death. Within the beginning scene, she is at her father's funeral. She is supposed to give him a eulogy, and she has nothing good to say about him. After her father's funeral, she goes onto this rooftop where she just likes to sit and think. Ryle then bursts onto the rooftop, kicking a chair, and he's quite angry. Immediately after he sees her, he apologizes for this and they introduce themselves. He tells her he's a surgeon who just saw a boy die tonight that he was operating on, and she tells him she has this dream of opening a flower shop. Then, as their conversation goes along and they get to know one another, and it actually seems like quite a pleasant first conversation, she tells him that she had fallen in love with a homeless guy sometime in her teens, and I think this is quite a significant thing, and I'd like to point something out. So, usually, people who end up becoming abusers tend to pay way more attention to their victim than the victim does to them in terms of noticing things that are very important. So he notices that she's an empathetic person through her demeanor, through the way that she speaks about certain things. And I think him being a surgeon and him caring about the kids makes him seem quite harmless to her. But out of nowhere, in the midst of this conversation that seems pretty pleasant with this seemingly decent guy, he then tells her he wants to sleep with her. Now, we can tell that she can see this as a discomfort because it's quite crass, and then she asks him how many women this has worked on, and then he admits, well, all of them. So there is an arrogance to him. She tells him basically that if he's interested in her, she's a relationship girl. And for anyone who would have been adept at noticing red flags, this would have been the moment to cut it off and just not speak to this guy because clearly they want different things, they're on different paths. He's not offering what she wants. But then she acquiesces and he starts to get a bit touchy-feely with her. Then he also lets her know that love is not for him. He gets a phone call and has to get up and go, and he asks her if he'll see her again, and she tells him that he will not be seeing her. In an ideal world, she would have walked away from this and spared herself so much heartache. But anyway, a couple of months go by, she opens her flower shop, she meets Alyssa. Alyssa starts working at her shop, they become really, really good friends, and then one day Alyssa says her husband and her brother are coming over and they're going to go out for drinks. Then, to Lily's surprise, she finds out that Alyssa's brother is actually Ryle. They proceed to all go out for drinks, and Lily decides that she's going to go home a bit early. Ryle then insists on walking her home. They walk, he lets her know that he cannot stop thinking about her, and he becomes a bit too pushy because she has already rejected him on the rooftop at this point. She is being standoffish because she doesn't want what he's offering. She can tell he's a bit of an F-boy, and she doesn't want any parts of it. He insists that he wants to kiss her, even though she's reluctant, and she is setting a boundary and saying no, and he keeps on pushing. So she lets him kiss her, and they end it right there. So what can we see from these first two interactions? He's pushy, he wants what he wants, and he's not going to respect any boundaries. Lily knows this. She's uncomfortable with this. But because of the household that she grew up in with an aggressive, authoritative father, she's learned to be quite nice and she's learned to be a people pleaser. And so she sometimes will let things happen even when she is uncomfortable with them. Now, in today's dating culture, because we've pretty much eroded boundaries, this might seem harmless. It might even seem cute to some people because he's quote unquote persistent. But at the root of this, he's really just not respecting her no. And this is an important thing to note because people who usually don't respect your no are people who also don't respect your wants and your needs and your desires. And neither will they have any consideration for your well being if you do continue to have them in your life, which we will see as their relationship develops. The next scene is at Alyssa's birthday. Lily walks in, she looks really nice at this birthday, and then there is Ryle. He follows her over to the bar and he puts her hand on hers. She politely asks him not to do that. She walks away, he follows her, and she immediately tells him, yo, look, I'm not interested. Stop touching me. Stop following me around. Stop sending flowers to my place of work. Stop coming over to my place of work. And he immediately tells her to shut up and listen. Now, the most alarming thing about this aren't the words that came out of his mouth, but the intensity within which he said it. You could tell there was some rage behind it. It's kind of like I want what I want, and you're going to give it to me. Because he says to her immediately after that, like, I'm trying here. And then she goes to him, like, are you 5? And then he goes, I really like you. But again, you like her, but you don't want to honor her. It's not like you want anything serious with her, and she has already said no multiple times. He then pushes and goes, would you like to go somewhere more quiet? And then she's like to talk. Again, at this point, we see signs of Lily's people pleaser, pushover personality. She doesn't want this. She's already said no multiple times, but then she allows it and she acquiesces, even though deep down this is not what she wants. One of the common themes that runs through the people pleaser pushover personality is a lot of the time doing things that one does not want to do in order to be liked, almost like a compulsion, which is what you see with her. And I've seen it with a lot of people a lot of the time. Like, they do things they don't want to do and immediately regret it, and then there's a lot of resentment that comes with that, which is part of Lily's thing. But we're also not going to ignore that there's a thing that a lot of women do, which is kind of like the joy of taming the player. So we're not also going to say her behavior is completely innocent here. She knows he's a player. She absolutely knows there's a part of her that wants to tame him, but it's also very much so linked to the abusive environment that she grew up in, and there is a part of her that kind of derives excitement from this, which still doesn't negate or change the fact that he's a creep. He holds her hand and asks her if they should go to a quiet place, and she tells him that she just wants to talk, but immediately after they get to the room, they start to make out. In the midst of them making out, she lets him know that she's uncomfortable with it and she does not want to go all the way. Now, at this point, we can clearly see that Ryle is a bit of an a-hole and he's very entitled and he feels like he deserves whatever it is that he sees and wants he deserves to get. But he stops and he immediately says, okay, cool, we're going to bed. Now, this is where, like, I think one of the most obvious indications of her people pleaser pushoverness shows, when he decides to go along with her now that he's not pushing her. She's uncomfortable. And one of the biggest problems that the pushover, the people pleaser has is that they really want to be liked. Because again, because of the environment they grew up in, they know that not being liked and not pleasing others could mean danger. So then she now starts to worry about whether or not he likes her. And then she starts to become playful and she starts to tease him, which obviously is a bad idea, because now you're creating room for there to be confusion about your boundaries. Right? Because if you keep playing along, even though you say no and you're very stern about your no and you've said no many times, then when you get playful, it seems like an invitation. They go to bed, they wake up the next morning, and his sister happens to come over to his apartment because she lives like right opposite him. They live in the same apartment building. She comes over to bring him a coffee, and then she notices that Lilly is there. She says she just wants to leave, and she acknowledges that it's none of her business, but then she says something. She lets her brother know that she loves him, but she tells Lilly, look, if you are looking for nothing, this is a great guy for you. But if you want love and you want a relationship, he is not the best person for it. She says, and I quote, he runs through women like candy. I mean, she's his one sister. If a man's sister is telling you to run from him, run. She knows him better than anyone. She loves this man and is still telling you the type of person that he is. You don't need any bigger red flag. I'd like to mention Alyssa is my favorite in-law in real life. In a movie, she's great because most women, even when they know their sons, brothers, family members are horrible people, they will never warn you against it and they will coddle them and enable their behavior. So props to Alyssa. Now, at this point, if you're Lilly, right, all the signs that this man is a horrible person are right in front of you, right? He is crass with you in the beginning. He tells you he wants to sleep with you. He tries to push your boundaries, even though you say you're a relationship girl. He keeps pushing to kiss you, so he does not respect you because he thinks he's entitled to your body. Even when you tell him to leave you alone, he keeps pushing. He follows you. He stalks you. He does not respect your no. This is not a person that's going to be safe with you. This is not a person that's going to be safe with you in intimacy. This is not a person that's going to be safe with you in a relationship. All the signs were there. After the sister's warning, he asks Lilly to date him. Now, at this point, again, Lilly, or whoever's watching, if you're the people pleaser in this, in your life, in this scenario, you need to put a couple of things together. After knowing all these things that he's done in the last few months that you've known him, and you've told him since the day that you saw him that you wanted a relationship or nothing else, even though he's not relationship material at all, and she overlooks this, and he does not suggest that. He does not ask her out on a date. He keeps trying to push to sleep with her. The only moment he decides that he wants to give it a go is when his character is questioned. And now it's more about how he looks and the reputation that he has, and trying to disprove that of other people and trying to prove that he is worthy of love. Does he then decide to offer her commitment? I also do believe that if he had slept with her the night before, he may not have made this suggestion. But he didn't get to sleep with her, so he still has that need to conquer her and need to prove other people wrong. because he doesn't know Lily enough. He hasn't known her long enough to actually push or want a relationship with her. So we see that. But at the same time, he has no other motivations. It's not how beautiful she is. It's not how funny she is. It's not how great she is. His motivation was never to be in a committed relationship with her. He just wanted to conquer her. It just so happens that now his character is being questioned and now he needs to prove something. So all of this is about ego. None of it is about love. Right before his sister leaves, she says she's embarrassed and makes a statement, and she says a normal person would just leave and go to therapy because she knows that he sees this as a game. But because they're adults, she lets them be. And I'm going to highlight this, although we just spoke about this. We need to remember Lily has been warned. She's seen the warning signs. The sister has warned her. And she goes along with this. So they start to date. And as they commence, in her own words, she says, "Don't make me regret this." So they have a great honeymoon stage, as most honeymoon stages go. But we also have to remember that most of the stuff he's doing here is because he's quote unquote trying, and he's doing it to prove a point, to show that he can. I actually plan on doing an episode breaking down Ryle's character further, but in that episode, I'll be talking about personality versus character. I think a lot of the time people make the mistake of falling in love with someone's personality, but the relationship usually tends to break down when you find out that person's character, because those are two completely different things. Personalities can be faked, character, not so much. So after the highlight reel of their fun honeymoon stage, they skip to a scene where he wakes her up from sleep, telling her that he has to go to work, and he asks if he's going to see her that night. And she lets him know that she can't because her mother's coming into town. He seems upset that she didn't let him know her mother was coming into town, and she's quite surprised that he would even want to meet her mom. Now, of course, she feels this way. They've not really been dating for long. She has an idea of the type of guy that he is, and it seems like moving too quickly for her, and she knows that this is quite a bad idea. And she says this because she asks him, she's like, "You want to meet my mom?" Because it seems too soon. And him being the guy he is, he says, well, he would like to meet the mother of the woman that he loves. And for the girl who's always wanted to be, for the people pleaser who's always wanted to be loved and approved, this melts her heart, and she goes along with it, and she eventually tells him that she loves him too. I can't speak for Lily. I don't know if she was ready to say this. I don't know if she even felt that genuinely. But I do know that there are instances where when you're with a very pushy person, they will tell you they love you too soon, and you might just say it back to avoid any backlash, or at the very least to avoid an uncomfortable situation. Let's also admit it is flattering for the person who never seems to commit to fall for you. It makes you feel special. And a lot of the time with people like this, you really aren't. So they head on over to have dinner with her mom. Her mom meets Ryle, and she is absolutely floored. He's handsome, he has a great job, and all this stuff. And the mom seems to focus on those things. And I thought that was very important. If she was a more aware mother, knowing the kind of household that she had raised her daughter in, I think one of the more important questions would have been asking how he treats her. But the mother was definitely more focused on how handsome he was and what job he had and all of that type of stuff. And I'm not surprised that her mother would act that way in the face of her own abuse and her being a battered woman. I think her mother has not healed from that or learned from that, because later on in the film, Lily does ask her mom why her mom never left her dad, and the mom said it was just easier to stay. I mean, Lily's dad was the mayor of their town, so due to status, maybe financial reasons, she believed that keeping her marriage was easier for her than leaving. So I wouldn't expect her to be the type of mother that would focus more on the health of the relationship, but more so the superficial qualities of the relationship. Then we go on to a scene in the bar where Alyssa and her husband announce that they are pregnant. And then Alyssa then mentions that they had a brother that had died. Another indication that their relationship had not gone far enough for him to insist on meeting Lily's mom, because he had not even expressed this very big, deep experience that he had had as a child, which basically would explain a lot of things about him, about his inability to connect and the struggles that he has. So, again, is he at a stage in this relationship where he is more focused on proving other people wrong and that he has the capacity to be in a relationship? Or is he actually genuinely trying to connect with Lily, seeing as he doesn't share the important stuff? So, in the next scene, she wakes up at his apartment and he's making breakfast. And he seems to be in a good mood and they're flirting with one another. And then she forgets that it's a big day for him. He has a surgery coming up. Now, obviously, if you're in a relationship, this is wrong. She should have remembered that he had a big thing coming up, but she forgets. And she apologizes for it, and he seems slighted. And here's the thing, Justin Baldoni, aside from being a very handsome man, he's a really great actor, because you can see all those little micro expressions in his face, and sometimes they're not very obvious, but you can tell what he's feeling, and it's great. It's great acting. So then he asks her about a heart tattoo on her shoulder, and she becomes very uncomfortable. She becomes very nervous about this particular tattoo. Now, just to mention, at their first meeting, she does tell him about the homeless guy that she met as a teenager that she loved and really, really liked. And I think she does actually also mention the guy's name. So I think this never really he never really stopped thinking about it, because he jovially says at the time, like, don't make me jealous of a homeless man. So that's just a reference point. So she then gets very uncomfortable. She gets very nervous and she's like, oh, it's just one of those stupid things that you do as a teenager. But he can tell like she has a lot of emotion attached to that, because she gets flustered and she gets very uncomfortable. And then he tells her that it's his favorite part of her, and he kisses it and they joke about it. And then she lets him know that like the food that he's baking is burning, and then he hits her. But the way that this is filmed, it's kind of like it was a mistake. It was a mistake. His hand was burned. He moved, and then so they film it that way. But that's really also because they have like flashbacks about her like forgetting the moments that he hits her and whatnot. So he does hit her in this moment. And I don't know if it's because he felt slighted that she forgot about his big surgery, or he felt jealous enough about a tattoo that she had several years ago from a teen relationship that it triggered him to hit her, or if it's because he struggles to connect and now he's really scared that he's connecting with her and he's terrified and so he responds in anger, or if it's a mixture of all three. We can't really tell, but either way, it's not justification for him to hit her. Now, in this moment, he immediately apologizes to her after hitting her, and she's like, what was that? She's terrified, she's scared of him. You can tell she's mortified. And he starts to apologize to her, and then she tells him to like get away, and then he falls, he cuts his hand. Then she feels bad because he has a big surgery, and then he says, I knew we'd make a mess of it. She's not involved in making a mess of it, sir, Mr. Ryle. You hit her because you were angry. It's not a we thing. You did something. But because she feels bad about him hurting his hand and he has a big surgery, she says it's a mistake. There's no problem. She kisses him and it's pretty much done. And it shouldn't be. But again, we have to go back to the fact that she grew up in an environment where this was normalized and she's uncomfortable, and it's a very weird thing to navigate, and so she decides to overlook this first moment where he hits her. So they go on to have a dinner date with Ryle's sister, Alyssa, and her husband. And Ryle picks Lily up from a job that she had to do with her flower shop and stuff. And while they're in the car, she tries to cover up where he hit her on her face with like makeup, and it's quite an uncomfortable scene. For more clarity, at the beginning of the episode, I did say that I would leave the events of Lily's childhood, her teen years, and her teen relationship towards the end of the discussion instead of intertwining it, because I thought it would be a bit more straightforward to speak about the current events and then go backwards later on. But this scene basically happens in a restaurant called Root that is owned by her high school love, Atlas. And at this point, we don't really know if Ryle is aware that the restaurant is owned by her ex lover. But it's also insinuated that that might be the case because he insists that they go there even though she really doesn't want to. So I don't know if it's because his sister wanted to try this new place or if it's because he wanted to find out if there was anything going on between her and Atlas. We don't really know, but then again, Ryle is a bit crazy. Once they get to the restaurant, Atlas comes over to their table and he starts to have a discussion. Alyssa's husband brings up some stuff about business and entrepreneurship. And during that time, we can tell that Ryle notices that there are some glances going on between Lilly and Atlas. And Atlas notices that there's a bandage on Ryle's hand, and he notices that there is a bruise coming through on Lily's face. And at this moment, when he notices that, he walks away immediately. Now, this is also because both Atlas and Lily, when they were teenagers, grew up in very abusive households. And to see that something had happened to her really upset him, and so he walks off, and everybody thinks it's something else. But, she and Atlas know what it is. And at this point, Ryle seems to be getting a bit riled up, pun intended. Lily gets up to go to the bathroom, and Atlas follows her in immediately, asking her what's going on with Ryle. She makes a snide remark talking about how she's not his mother, and he gets snide back at her and says, well, you're turning into yours. And then she tells him that everything is okay and that it was just a misunderstanding. And then as they're walking out of the bathroom, Ryle shows up. Atlas then attacks Ryle, about him hitting her. They get into this huge fight. Ryle says something really nasty to him about her wasting her virginity on this guy. They then get out of the restaurant and she chases after Ryle. Again, Justin Baldoni acted Ryle as such a scary dude because even in this moment, I think it's way less about her fear of losing her relationship. It's her fear of him. And she is apologizing for something she's not done. She's not cheated on him. She's done nothing wrong. She's done nothing with Ryle. Sorry, she's done nothing with Atlas. Atlas is a guy that she knew half of her life ago. He just happens to still feel very protective over her. But at the same time, even though she's never cheated, she still does have feelings for Atlas, but it's not her fault, right? How you feel about someone is how you feel about someone. It's a relationship that didn't end because they wanted it to end. Her relationship with Atlas actually ended because she watched her father beat him into a pulp when he caught Atlas in her bedroom when they were kids. They were canoodling around in bed. Her dad barges in and beats Atlas into a pulp. And the last time that she sees Atlas, he's bleeding and an ambulance is taking him away. So that's the last time she saw him. So she still kind of yearns for him and he yearns for her. So Ryle then says anyone but him. And he's still really coming from a place of ego. And then he continues to say, I've never been here with anybody else before, and you've got me, and I love you, Lily. And she apologizes to him and she assures him that it's just him. And at this point, I mean, different people can have different opinions about how this scene is, but when I look back at his past behavior, you can still see that most of this is from ego. He has a lot of insecurities in relation to Atlas, and I don't know if his insecurities in relation to Atlas are justified, apart from the fact that she used to love someone else. And I mean, this is a woman in her 30s. Of course, she's had exes. Of course, she's had somebody that she used to love before. But what matters is what she's doing right now. And so far, she's actually really done nothing wrong. He's just operating from a very hurt place. And as his sister said, he's supposed to go deal with that stuff in therapy. In the next scene, Lily and Alyssa are at the flower shop and Atlas shows up. Now, I love me some Alyssa. Alyssa got her purse and went to go get some coffee and excused herself from the whole situation and gives Atlas and Lily some privacy. He walks in and he apologizes for the way that he reacted to finding out that Ryle had hit her. And he just lets her know that whenever she may need him, that he's always going to be there. So they have this awkward conversation about exchanging numbers, but then he's like, you know what? Here's a card with my number on it. I'll put it in the back of your phone, between your phone case and your phone in case you ever need it. She says she won't need it, and he says that he hopes she won't. Now we skip over to a scene with Lily and Ryle at his apartment. Lily is cooking, and Ryle comes up behind her. She seems a bit absent-minded, but then she asks him if he's happy. And he says that he wasn't happy, but that she makes him happy. And again, this might seem flattering to most people, but in all honesty, I think being happy with someone and having them add to your happiness is great, but they shouldn't be the only light in your life. That's not very healthy. So then he asks her if she's happy, and she says, well, she's got all these issues, she's got this ticking clock and all these things that women have to worry about. And he then says he doesn't know if he's happy with that answer. And then she says, well, in all honesty, her responses are a bit incoherent, but she just concludes with the fact that she feels like she developed a coping mechanism from her mother. And the truth is, I appreciate this. I think Lily, to some degree, is very self aware. And I think that's what also makes her people pleaser slash pushover personality very interesting. She's very self-aware of the reason why she acts the way that she acts. She's very aware of it, and that's great. But I think it's also a sign that sometimes you can again know that things are wrong cognitively. You can know that, how your childhood affects you. You can be very self-aware and still subconsciously fall into some traps. And then she clarifies that her dad used to hit her mom. And then he's like, I'm so sorry. He didn't know. And she was like, well, this isn't one of those things that people talk about. And most people actually don't. A lot of people grow up in, a lot of regular people that you would assume have very regular, normal lives. Sometimes you might even think they have loving families and loving parents, grew up in a lot of violence and a lot of turbulence and a lot of high emotion households, high unregulated emotional households. And then he asks her if her father ever hurt her, and she said he didn't, but she was still very terrified of him because she saw what he was capable of doing to her mother. But she then tells him that he did almost kill Atlas, though, like I mentioned earlier. He bloodied that boy. He left in an ambulance. It was really, really bad. And I can understand, like, a father being upset that some boy he doesn't know is in his daughter's room. I get it. But the rage with which he beat that teenage boy, unfathomable. And she saw that. Her first love, didn't know if he was going to live or die, as he's pushed on, what do you call those things? As he's pushed on, like he's taken away on a stretcher away from her home. And I think there's also something else to note about Lily's personality here. She justifies and overlooks Ryle's aggression towards her, and she makes excuses for him. But when she saw him exchange blows with Atlas, it bothered her a lot. It bothered her way more than it bothered her when he would hit her, which also says a lot about how she puts others before herself. So then they go to see Alyssa's new baby. Alyssa just gave birth, and in that moment, he's, as she says, drunk on baby smell, and he proposes to her and they get married. And in those scenes, just like the scenes of when they first started dating, you see that sometimes people have really great moments. I think when people talk about abusive relationships, sometimes people think it's bad all the way through. And it's like, or when people ask, like, why did this person stay? A lot of the time it's because between the bad times, there are sprinkles of really, really good times. And it was such a sweet moment. But then as the viewer, you now have an idea of the nature of the relationship. Not long after the wedding, Lily and Ryle are on the phone to her mom, and Lily is in the kitchen doing something, so she gives her phone over to Ryle to help her charge it. And then she hears something break. A lamp is broken, so she runs over to see what happened. And then she sees Ryle sitting down. He's very upset. And then he tells her that when he went to charge her phone fell, and he saw that there was a number in there. Now, remember earlier, I did say that Atlas had put his number between her phone and her phone case in case she needed it because he was concerned and worried that Ryle might hit her again. So Ryle says he called the number and Atlas picked up. He was really upset, and then she keeps trying to reassure him that it was nothing. He then stands up and smashes the phone, like right very close to her head. And in this moment, he doesn't hit her, but clearly he's intimidating her. He's already broken a lamp. He's hitting things in proximity to her. Actually, one of the precursors to physical abuse a lot of the time is when the person hits things that are close to you, even when they don't hit you. So be mindful of that. But I think in that moment, including the fear of him doing something again to her, but also in her people pleasing personality and her just trying to appease him, she says it's nothing. But just a point that I'd like to make, abusive relationship or not, I think when something like that happens with your partner, it can be very upsetting for them if they do find out or think that you're cheating or going back to an ex. And I think in that moment, if you do have the opportunity to do so, instead of telling them it's nothing, they're going to feel like you're messing with their intelligence or trying to gaslight them. I think it's really important for her to be very straightforward, even if her her explanation might upset him. And in that moment, instead of saying it's nothing, because the person's always going to assume you're lying, what she should have done was remind him about what she told him about her parents' relationship, Atlas witnessing that, and her dad almost killing Atlas, and then him seeing her bruise at the restaurant, which then got him to worry about her, and that's why he put his number in her phone in case she needed help. Now, obviously, as the other person in the relationship, you'd be like, yeah, but you've got the police. But hey, you know, Atlas had good intentions. And so I think she should have given that explanation, but maybe she didn't. She felt too scared to do so. Maybe there wasn't enough time, but I'm just saying, just for the people who are not in abusive relationships, if something like this ever happens and your partner confronts you with it, just give them the valid explanation because telling them it's nothing just makes them feel worse and it is a bit gaslighty. Now back to the scene. She chases after him. He goes out through the fire exit, and as she's begging him and chasing after him and trying to explain, the scene cuts as she falls down the stairs. Then her eyes open and he's cleaning her wounds. And she wakes up and she completely has no idea of what happened. He tells her that she fell down the stairs and he tells her that she's okay. And then he asks her a couple of questions. And again, this is like very indicative of the type of manipulative person that he is. Because one, he lies to her about her falling down the stairs. He threw her down the stairs because he was angry. And he says, "What's your name?" She says, "My name is Lily Bloom." Then he asks her where they are. She says, "We're in our apartment." He asks her who he is. She says, "You're my husband." And then he says, what am I doing?" "You're helping me." And then he said, "Say it's nothing." And she says, "It's nothing." And that's exactly what she said to Atlas when Atlas was questioning her about whether or not Ryle was hitting her. So he lies about when he beats her. She has no memory of when he does do it, or she has very chopped up memory about it. And he manipulates her into normalizing it and making it seem as though she is okay. Because in his mind, if he can convince her she's okay, then he's done nothing wrong. In the next scene, she dresses her wounds and goes on about her day. Then Alyssa comes over to the shop and lets her know that they've basically made it on like the top 10 places to go in Boston in, I think it's People magazine or Vanity Fair, I can't remember which one. And she reads that she's happy. She goes home, she prepares dinner in order for her and Ryle to celebrate, and then Ryle comes home. He comes home and she asks him if he's read the article, and he asks her to read it. And she starts to read the one about her shop, but he tells her to scroll to skip to number one. Number one is obviously Root, which is Atlas's restaurant, and he basically speaks about how he always wanted to call a restaurant Root because of her. She's a gardener, she loves flowers and all that stuff, and it was all about her. He also speaks about the wooden flower that he carved from a tree when he was younger. That heart is in the same shape of the tattoo that is on her clavicle that Ryle had asked her about multiple times. And she always referred to it as a stupid thing that you do when you're a teen. He continues to be very upset about it. So then he asks her if if she loves him. And she says she does. And then he asks her if she loves Ryle. And she says she doesn't know. Which again, like, so long as she's not actually cheating, like, she had a confusing upbringing. You know, she had a confusing upbringing. She was in love with this guy. The only reason why she didn't end up with him is really because her parents forbade it and her dad beat him, and probably didn't she probably didn't think there was a reality where he would want to be with her after what her father did and all that stuff, so they didn't see one another. But again, even if she was cheating, there is no justification for what follows. So immediately after he starts to kiss her. Now, for most people, they don't want to get intimate immediately after an argument, especially one that uncomfortable, because he forced her to read when she didn't want to read. Every time she would stop reading, he would tell her to keep going, and he was intimidating her and he was right in her face. So he starts to kiss her and she doesn't want it, and she's like, stop. And then he refuses to, and he keeps going, and then like he pulls her off the counter and he keeps going after her, and he pins her down to the couch, and she's begging him and she's telling him to stop, and he hits the final nail in the coffin and he grapes her. He essays her on the couch, and as he's doing that, he bites down onto her clavicle, literally trying to remove the tattoo that she got, the tattoo associated with Atlas. Absolutely insane. She pushes him off her and she runs, as she should. Once she escapes from their apartment, the first person she could think of was Atlas. So she goes over to Atlas's restaurant and he helps her. They go over to the hospital. This is where she finds out that she's pregnant, but she also chooses to cover up for Ryle and not tell the doctors or the police that he had essayed her. She stays with Atlas for a bit and she doubts whether or not she will be a good mother. And then he reminds her of the kindnesses that she showed him when they were teenagers, when he was homeless and she saw him and she got him food and got him some supplies and let him shower at her home and still chose to be with him even when everyone else made fun of him in school for being homeless. He reminds her of the core of her character and tells her that if she did decide to keep that child, that she would be an amazing mother. He drives her up to her shop, I believe, and then he hugs her and basically lets her know that if she ever decides to fall in love with someone again, that he would always be there. And I think I will also do an episode or a short video, I don't know how long it's going to be, about Lilly and Atlas's relationship, because I think if you ever really want a true definition or a version of what true love looks like, it would be Lilly and Atlas's relationship. So I'm going to make a video on that. The topic at hand. So Lilly then has a meeting with Alyssa, Ryle's younger sister, and she tells her everything that happened. And Alyssa's response to this is exactly what makes her my favorite in-law of all. She obviously tells her that she has loved her brother her whole life and that she has watched him struggle to open up his heart to people because he has issues with connecting, because when they were younger, they had a brother. I don't remember if he was older or younger, but they were really close in age, and they were playing with their dad's gun and the safety wasn't on, and they were playing cowboys. So he shot and he didn't know, he was 6 years old, and he shoots his brother by mistake and his brother dies. I guess it brings everything very full circle, why he becomes a surgeon, why he performs surgeries on kids and all that stuff, and all that's very noble. But at the same time, just because you have a fear of connecting doesn't necessarily mean you should make someone your emotional or physical punching bag. And Alyssa says, He's my brother and I love him, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I would love for you to forgive him. But as your best friend, if you go back to him, I will never speak to you again. And I think that's such a beautiful thing because every friend should be that way if if their friend is ever in an abusive relationship. But at the same time, for her to be a sister, which is something that a lot of people struggle with, and not only recognize what her brother did was wrong, but to also go ahead and forbid her friend, her sister in law, her brother's wife, from going back with him or getting back with him because she will not enable his bad behavior. And let's remember that Alyssa was the one who warned Lilly from getting in this relationship to begin with, because although she may not have known that her brother had the capacity to hit a woman or the capacity to essay a woman, she knew that he had issues with connecting and that he had nothing to offer Lilly to begin with. And I absolutely applaud her for that. And I love how she was written in as a character. In the next scene, which I already brought up earlier, she is setting up her new house that she's going to live in with her baby, and she asks her mom why her mom stayed with her dad, and her mom said she stayed because it was easier and because she loved him. And I appreciate that they put that in there. It makes her really brave to have such an uncomfortable conversation with her mom. But and I also appreciate the mom's honesty, but it can be very difficult to hear that because I think Lily was also considering what kind of life she may have had and maybe what kind of choices she may have made if she didn't have to grow up witnessing and seeing that. I think what I don't really like too much about Lily's mom, though, I mean, although people grow at different paces, I don't think her mom never takes responsibility for the role that she played in creating an environment that made abuse and physical violence so normalized that when her daughter got into her own relationships, it took the worst of the worst for her own daughter to leave. Then, when Lily is setting up her daughter's crib, she calls Ryle over to help with the crib. He comes over to help, and when they're done, she asks him if he wants to feel the baby kicking because she felt a little bit of pain, and he asked. And after he feels the baby, he asks her to come back, and he tells her he's going to get help. And I'm really proud of Lily for sticking to her guns and choosing not to get back with him, because when women are pregnant, their hormones are all over the place. They become very emotional, and most women would stay, and she chose not to. So we're proud of Lily. So we head on to the birth scene. She gives birth to their baby. She allows Ryle to be there. And immediately after the baby's born, he joins her on the bed and he holds the baby, and they talk about what to name the child, and she suggests that they name the child after his brother. He bursts into tears, saying that that's the nicest thing anyone's ever done to him. And along with that, he tells his daughter that he will keep her safe. And in the midst of that, Lily asks for a divorce. And he's like, oh, let's not. And she's like, no, because.
What if one day she came to you and said, my boyfriend hit me? What would you say to her? Or she said, Daddy, my husband pushed me down the stairs, but he said it was an accident, so it's fine. If she said her husband held her down and she begged him to stop, the person she loved was hurting her, what would you say to her? I would beg her to leave him, and I'd beg her never to go back.
So then she says that she's not asking for the divorce for them, she's asking for the divorce for her baby, because she doesn't want her daughter to witness what she witnessed growing up. She doesn't want that life for her daughter. She wants it to end with her. And that's Lily's silver lining. Even through her many self-sacrificing choices, even through the red flags that she ignored, even through all the signs that she ignored, she finally stands up for herself. And she finally chooses to walk away. And I think the lesson here in this particular movie, the lesson you need to take, what you need to learn from this is sometimes it's okay to leave at the first sign. Sometimes it's okay not to give second chances. Sometimes it's okay not to overlook bad behavior. When they first met, he was throwing a tantrum, kicking a chair, blowing up. She overlooked it. He was very crass and entitled with her about wanting to sleep with her, and she overlooked it. He got into a relationship with her to protect his ego, and she overlooked it. He crossed a lot of her boundaries, and she overlooked it. He hit her, and she overlooked it. He pushed her down the stairs, and she overlooked it. And for some women, they keep going. Some women end up dead. Some people end up dead because, we're not going to say only men are abusive, but for the sake of this case study and the story, we're speaking about women. And that's sometimes where people pleasing can lead you. It can lead you to staying at a job, a dead end job you don't want, and never making something out of your life because you didn't make the right choice to say no, to stop something, to leave. It could be with friendships. You could have a friend who is taking advantage of you, and it could be detrimental to your life. I mean, in so many areas, caring about what people think, how other people feel, how you can serve other people can always be very detrimental to you. So that's pretty much the lesson with Lilly. She could have walked away a long time ago, but she has learned the lesson, and that's the most important part. So now we're going to move on into your personal life and why you do what you do, why you can't say no, why it's not your fault, and what you can do about it. So a lot of the time, either when you're watching a movie or a documentary or even in real life, you'll notice that a lot of parents are kind of bothered when their child's first word is no, or when they're going through their terrible twos and they say no to everything. But I don't think people understand the value of that no at all. I think people are worried about the tone of their child and how their child responds to authority, but it's very important for you to teach your children how to say no and how to set boundaries rather than completely preventing them from having them. People are more worried about having an easy child to deal with rather than the repercussions of what they teach their children about boundaries and about their experiences. The word no is a word that most people don't want to hear, and that's generally because most humans are quite rejection sensitive. But in my humble opinion, it is the one word that could quite literally save your life and help you get out of really bad situations long before things go bust. And here's something that I've observed. Whenever we see someone remain in a relationship long after realizing it's toxic or stay in a certain job, even if the environment is unhealthy, even looking at people who keep friends that take advantage of them, we hone in on the perpetrators. And as we should, because I think people should be held accountable. Actually, one of the things that bothers me the most about this movie is that Ryle never went to jail. But I also understand her reasons for maybe not wanting to send him to jail. So, because, you have to go to court, you have to be a witness in your case, and sometimes that can be a bit more traumatizing. No one ever really talks about what goes on in the mind of the victim and, the why, because we can talk about supporting victims, we can talk about holding perpetrators accountable, but no one really talks about the fact that all abusers study their victims. Now, of course, even the most confident people amongst us, the most no-nonsense, cutthroat, iron lady personalities still can end up in abusive circumstances, but it is a lot less likely because abusers tend to seek people who are very empathetic, people who are very meek a lot of the time to make it easier for them to carry out some of these abuses. So what is it that happens in someone's life that leads them to ignore the signs? Why don't they stand up for themselves? Why would a perpetrator choose that person as their victim? Being Nigerian, I think I can speak for most people when I say that in most households, children are raised to have respect for authority. And a lot of the time, there is no room for the feelings and thoughts and ideas or even experiences of children. And some people might think this is a good thing and that this is discipline, but in the long run, you're actually creating people who, one, have no communication skills, and two, can end up in really bad situations because they don't know where to even begin when it comes to standing up for themselves. Some people may not even know what they like. They might not know what they don't like. Or even if they know that, they're not going to voice those things because they have been told that their thoughts, ideas, feelings, and experiences did not matter. That can be very detrimental for relationships, even when it doesn't go to the extremes of physical abuse or SA or even, losing their lives in these relationships. But it always starts from home. So instead of telling your children not to say no, instead of telling your children not to complain, instead of telling your children that they're not allowed to get angry, instead of telling your children that they're not allowed to correct you, teach them how. And if you don't have the skills, learn the skills. It's your responsibility. Because when you let a child know that, oh, I respect your no, I respect your boundaries. You know, when your child says they don't want to hug a certain family member, instead of forcing them to do so, you ask them why. They might have a valid reason. That person might be intimidating to them. Maybe that person might even touch them. And I think this is also something that goes into like childhood SA, even when children are taught to fear those who are older than them, when they're taught to respect and cower to authority, when bad things are happening to them, they're never going to come tell you. They could be getting bullied at school, they could be being physically or sexually abused by other adults or other children, and they might never feel comfortable to tell you because you've already instilled it in them that they shouldn't say no, that they should respect authority, that you're not a safe space. And I feel like this is even worse with the children who get beatings for stepping out of line. So I think one of the key ways to avoid an adult that struggles with identifying abusive behavior, an adult that struggles with walking away when they see the signs, an adult that struggles to stand up for themselves, is rooted in what you tell them about how important their feelings, their thoughts, and their experiences are as a child. And you have to start from there. Although this is the norm and people think raising kids this way is our culture and therefore that makes it okay, you might be creating an easier, simpler parenting experience for you because you don't have a bad kid and you're not going to be judged by others for having a bad kid that is rebellious and quote unquote bad. But you are setting your child up for a very difficult life because people who also don't stand up for themselves tend to also have a lot of resentment against the world. Whenever they allow their boundaries to be crossed, it damages them, it hurts them because they do not feel seen. And not feeling seen can build up a lot of rage and it creates a lot of problems. Don't do this to your kids, please. There's this video that's been circulating on TikTok, and I thought it would be a great example of the right attitude for a parent to have when a child voices or expresses a boundary in a particular way. And in this video, as you'll see, it's a father whose daughter suddenly stops accepting his hugs. And instead of enforcing them on her, he actually asks her what's going on. And then she explains that she actually trusts him and that he's the only man who accepts when she says no, which then makes her safe enough to establish that boundary with him, which is a testament to his parenting. And that's why she does that, because all the boys in school always cross her boundaries when she asks not to be touched.
So she kind of pushed me away. I'm like, it's all good. You know what I mean? Then it kind of became a joke for a few years. And then, she got a little bit older. And so one day, I asked her, I said, hey, we good? She's like, yeah. Why would you ask me that? I said, well, every time, dad tries to give you a hug, kiss you on the cheek or whatever, you're always pushing me away. And she looked at me and she said, and she was a little bit more developed than girls her age. And she looked at me and she said, because you are the only man that when I tell you not to touch me and stop, you do it. Because when I go to school and the boys touch me and they grab me and I tell them to stop, they think it's a joke. Mm-hmm. And they won't stop. But I know if I tell you to stop, you'll stop. So it wasn't that she didn't want me to. It was the fact that she found peace and solace in the fact that this is a man, the first man in my life, that when I tell him not to touch me, he actually listens to me. And it broke my heart. But it let me know what kind of privilege that I have, right? And then I start researching. Because now my heart is wide open. Yeah. So now I'm talking to my mom. I'm telling her the story. She said, son, the stuff I had to endure.
Now, I know I've harped on this throughout the breakdown of the movie itself, that Lilly overlooks all the red flags. All the red flags just keep piling in and she keeps overlooking it. But the root of why a lot of people tend to overlook has a lot to do with what people grow up seeing in their households and what's normalized to them. But I think it also has a lot to do with, even as an adult, what's encouraged in your culture. we live in a culture that I believe enables abuse. So, for example, being Nigerian, we have this culture of forgiveness, right? Nobody is perfect. You want a perfect husband, you want a perfect wife, you're not very forgiving, and they guilt you into forgiving unacceptable behavior, and it becomes the norm. People will tell you relationships, friendships, marriage is hard, and therefore you need to be comfortable and accept things that you really shouldn't be accepting, and that can be very dangerous. So even the culture itself hones in on forgiving and forgiveness. We focus a lot on protecting the family, protecting family members. You could come across a family where there is a lot of childhood molestation that takes place and nobody ever does or says anything about it because, well, you don't want to ruin the family name. But then here you have a child who grows up very damaged because nobody protected them and nobody stood up for them, which then further intensifies the feeling of not being important, not being valuable. Feelings, values, experiences, pain not being recognized, especially by the people who are meant to keep you safe. And that can also present itself in adulthood as somebody who allow isn't the right word, but who succumbs to very abusive, domineering characters in their life. So after you have a life where you are disciplined out of protest and saying no, after you've lived a life where you are forced to quote unquote respect elders, even though really and truly it's more of shutting you down so it makes you easier to digest to others, you have a culture that then pushes forgiveness onto you and normalizes people hurting you and betraying you. And now you've become accustomed to your feelings and your experiences not mattering. You then grow a protective shield, and that protective shield is the root of your people pleasing. You want to be liked, you want to be loved because you knew that growing up when your parents didn't like you, when the adults didn't like you, it meant maybe punishment, it meant beatings, it meant insults, whatever it was, depending on how you were disciplined or how you were raised in your household. And so you grow up knowing that if I get people to like me, that means I am accepted, and when I am accepted, I am safe. So now we go on to why it's not the people pleaser or the pushover's fault. However, it's your responsibility now to change it. So if you don't want to keep living that life, you have to then take the reins and take the wheel and change that for yourself. So how do you do this? How do you not end up in these situations? Because the truth is, it is your life, and therefore you do have control over what ends up happening, or at least some control to a certain degree. For instance, in the movie, when she's sitting on the roof the first time she meets Ryle, he's kicking a chair and he's throwing a tantrum. Now, if you know that you are a pushover, because you have to be very self-aware to know this, you would have at this point, you know your family history, you know what your patterns are, so it should be easier for you to recognize. When you know you're a pushover and you see that kind of behavior, you are better off not interacting with that kind of person. Now, of course, our culture will tell you not to judge people, and people go through a lot, but again, you are looking at not putting yourself in situations or in relationships with people who trigger you and people who remind you of the horrors of your childhood or the horrors of some of the things that you may have experienced even in your adulthood throughout your life. Avoid those people. You're better off that way. Does it make you a bit more judgmental? Fine. You should learn to be very comfortable with being judged, although I know that this is something that is very difficult for a pushover because the environment you grow up in makes you work so hard and thrive not to be judged and not to be cast out and ostracized, because that might mean danger. And I will double down on this. Like, this is the most important bit, and I think when you have this bit down, it makes everything else along the way easier. You need to become very, very comfortable with not being liked. It's hard to do, but you need to get this particular part of it down pat. Because the moment you get rid of worrying about what people think of you, whether or not you have their approval, you can walk away from anything and anyone without worrying. You can walk away from a bad friendship, a bad job, a bad relationship. You're not going to be worried, because if you really think about it, like, many people are in friendships they don't want to be in because even though their friends are very harmful to them, because they don't want to be set aside, they don't want to be judged. Many people remain in toxic relationships. I think there's this whole thing that's been happening with a lot of millennials, like cutting off their parents. There are so many people who might want to do it, and it's usually because those parents are very toxic. It's not just disrespectful kids dropping off their parents. I think a lot of those people drop their parents because their parents are toxic and very harmful to them. and so they cut them off. And most people would label them as disrespectful and ungrateful kids that don't have any value for what their parents sacrificed for them, and so on and so forth. But for the people amongst them who don't care about being judged, they don't care and they go on with their lives absolutely unaffected, because no one else gets to tell them about their experience. No one else gets to tell them about what they went through. No one else gets to tell them how to live their lives, and usually those people tend to die happier. So that was just like an example. But if you become very comfortable with not gaining or having the approval of others, you get to live a more comfortable, safe life. There are people who are in marriages that make them absolutely miserable, but they don't leave because they don't want to shame their families. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to become a divorcee. And so they remain. It's almost like the story of Isis, the woman who's been blowing up and going viral, the woman who had the whole video about how she had married a monster and how he had essayed 2 of her daughters. She admits that her husband raped her in the first 4 months or so of their relationship, and she still decided to stay with him. I feel like although different women have different stories, she lives in America. She could have left this man. He would have still had to pay child support. She didn't really have to stay. She lived in a very law-abiding country and she would have been perfectly fine, but she stayed. But her staying isn't the problem that I even had, because that's her choice. She's an adult. She allowed her kids to live with a sex offender, for a lack of better words, and she was advertising this type of relationship to other women. So she was way more comfortable living with, having her children in a household with a man who is that much of a monster, just so she could go out there into the world and advertise her life as lavish and comfortable, and trying to draw other women in it, because outside perception mattered to her way more than her own safety and the safety of her children. Right? Living up to what society expects of you is very detrimental and very dangerous. It can put you in a hole you will not be able to get out of. So the most important thing here is learning not to care about what people think of you. And it can start by the little things. So I'm like a unapologetic queen of complaining. If I do not like something, I am going to say it. And I was not always like this. But now, I have a problem. Like, I can't shut up. And, I don't care. And I'll keep being this way because it works, right? It protects me. It could be something as small as if you go to a restaurant. Now, I'm not saying you should like be rude to waiters unprovoked. This is not what I'm promoting. What I'm trying to say is a lot of people might think it's rude when a waiter gets your order wrong for you to complain about it. I think that's absolute BS. If I'm paying for something and I order it and you get it wrong, I need you to get me the right order. There's nothing wrong with that. But we live in a society that tells you that there is something wrong with you if you point out that you do not like something. I don't like it. I didn't order it. Can you please change it? Thank you. I don't think that's a problem. And if you're uncomfortable with that, it will affect every other area of your life. You will pay for things that you didn't want. You will accept things that you didn't want to accept. You will do things that make you feel absolutely horrible afterwards. And so even with something like that, if you didn't order sushi and you wanted some hot wings and they bring you some sushi, don't eat the sushi. You don't want to eat it. This is probably like the worst example, but you get what I mean. These are like the worst food examples to give, but like you get what I mean. Like if you want something, especially if you have to sacrifice something to get it, you should get exactly what you ask for. So start doing that. If you go to a restaurant, they get you the wrong drink, kindly ask for the right drink. Don't drink something you don't want and then pay for it after. Don't do it. Stand up for yourself. If somebody cuts in line and you're actually in a rush, because sometimes like you overlook the BS that people do and the rude stuff that they do, but when somebody cuts in front of you in line, sometimes you need to be like, look, I was here before you and I'm actually in a rush and I need to go somewhere. You don't overlook everything, because that overlooking can lead to you ignoring when you're being stepped on. So yeah, if somebody does that, you don't have to fight them. You don't have to make a fuss out of it, but step up for yourself and be like, yo, this isn't okay. I'm not comfortable with that. You don't have to fight anyone. You can do all of this in a very calm tone. I think even with your family, if you, let's say, have family traditions every Christmas or every Thanksgiving and you have other plans and you really want to live up to your other plans and live your life and make your own choices, you're an adult. Apologize to your family. Tell them that you love them. Let them know you'll see them another other time, but this year I'm doing my own thing. And that should be okay. And if your family is real and your family really loves you, they're not going to take it personally. You know, a very unhealthy family dynamic would be if they guilted you to do something when you've spent maybe 25, 30, 35 years of your life doing their whims, and this 1 year they can't give you some time off. It lets you know where you stand with them. So your relationship probably is more to do with how they're pleased with you than what makes you happy in this one life that you get to live. And it could be just these smaller things, and it will eventually creep into other areas of your life. You know, if your friends are pushing you to go out and you don't want to go out, stand on it. If you are in a relationship with someone, you need to also learn to kindly say no. If you saying no to something that you don't want, especially if you're setting a boundary, means the end of a friendship or the end of a relationship, then so be it. It doesn't necessarily mean you should stay and be uncomfortable and unsafe, because again, it can lead to worse experiences and it can lead to a lot of danger. But I think especially when it comes to physical and sexual abuse, this is something that most abusers are looking for. Are you capable of being uncomfortable, you know, to make other people happy? A lot of abusers choose their victims this way. They choose people who don't stand up for themselves, people who don't have others to stand up for them. And so if you can exemplify that you are not easy to push around and that you stand up for yourself, usually the abusers will avoid you because they know you're going to say something, they know you're going to do something about it, they know you're not going to take it sitting down, and so they will steer clear of you, and that is exactly what you want. If you're looking for a sign that isn't outright aggression and violence, we can also look at the moment when he, just minutes after meeting her, crassly tells her that he wants to sleep with her. That's a huge red flag. If that's not what you want, if that's not what you're comfortable with, don't continue to allow it. It only gets worse. You are either going to end up with somebody who ends up taking advantage of you because you have a difficulty saying no, or you have somebody who could commit an act of violence like physical or sexual assault towards you. And because you may not have outright said no or you didn't stand up for yourself, then you might end up being blamed, and then you have to then end up dealing and packing it up and dealing with the trauma. So you're going to have to find the courage. You say your no, you walk away, you don't allow yourself to be roped back in, and it can be very difficult and it would take a lot of practice. But again, that's also another sign of danger. So don't view people like that as completely harmless. If they are presenting something to you that you do not want, if they are presenting something to you that makes you feel violated, you have to shut it down. Don't give them a second chance. Don't start to look for the why. Don't try to assess their character. The reality is, anybody who is making such a suggestion to you just moments after meeting you, without knowing what you are and are not comfortable with, you don't have that kind of relationship with them, it is okay to judge them. They are not good for you. They might not even be a good person. Shut it down. Anybody who respects you, and people most definitely should respect you, especially after they've met you, when you've not given them any reason to otherwise, to disrespect you, most definitely shut it down. No good is coming out of this. Now, with all that stalking, I've already spoken on this channel about like my experience with stalking. With all that stalking, I have no idea why she didn't like get the authorities involved. Now, people might think this is like dramatic, but he follows her around. He shows up where she is. She doesn't like it. She tells him she doesn't like it. He touches her when she doesn't want to be touched. He pushes her to kiss him when she doesn't want to kiss him. Shut it down. And if he's not listening to you, call the authorities. It makes it way easier for you, because once you allow yourself to get roped in with somebody who has already shown you that they're manipulative, they're entitled, and they're aggressive, it's going to be very, very difficult to get yourself out once you already get in that. So please have the heart, have the strength, tell a friend if you need support, but you need to get out of this. And I think a lot of the reason why the quintessential pushover or people pleaser continues to engage in these types of situations with these types of people is because they want to see the good in them. Oh, they don't mean it. Oh, that's not who they really are. No, they are showing you exactly who they are by being aggressive, not respecting your no when you say it, and by crossing your boundaries and by doing things that make you feel uncomfortable when you say they make you feel uncomfortable. So please note these things. There is no good person that acts this way. Another really important thing, and I think this tends to happen a lot of the time in romantic relationships, and I think many people make this mistake, sometimes this is something that can be very difficult to identify, especially in the heat of the moment, but it's really about not listening to what is being said. Now, sometimes you will find yourself being gaslighted out of making a big deal out of nothing. But the truth is, you're not making a big deal out of nothing. Sometimes it's really important to read into things because it protects you from a lot of BS. Listen to what is being said. Now, most women, before they understand male nature and before they understand the game of dating, usually it's normalized that even if a guy is a player, if you tell him that you want a relationship and he continues to pursue you and then eventually dates you, then it's because you tamed him. This isn't necessarily true. I think you need to believe people when they tell you who they are. When he told her that love wasn't for him, when his sister warned her against him, she should not have thought that she won a prize when he decided to commit to her. He already told you who he was. The one person in the world that knows him more than anyone told you who he was. You don't need any more information, right? You're not taming him. You're not special. You're not better than all the other girls. There's no prize at the end of this. Unless somebody exemplifies good character and unless somebody exemplifies good intentions from the beginning, please don't go around trying to change them. It's not your job. It's not your responsibility. This is the only way that you can protect yourself. I think one of the things that's overlooked a lot as well is body language that is scary and uncomfortable, but isn't necessarily aggressive or violent. Sometimes you can feel discomfort or fear by the way that somebody looks at you. Sometimes someone can speak to you in a very calm voice. For example, when he tells her to shut up for a second at the party, when she tells him to stop touching her and stop following her and to stop sending her flowers, he tells her to shut up for a minute, but the look in his eyes is absolutely terrifying. And she looked uncomfortable. Once you see those types of things, they're a precursor to what's coming next, especially when you're in a moment where it's uncalled for. She didn't insult him, she didn't say anything to him, but the way that he spoke to her, the silent part was being said out loud in the way he looked at her and in the tone of his voice. So those are some of the things that you also need to look out for in terms of identifying people that can be a danger to you and you not falling into the trap of, again, succumbing, acquiescing to their charms. I think it would also be disingenuous to have a conversation about the root cause of being a people pleaser and a pushover without talking about your current relationship with your parents. So, whatever they taught you when you were a child is a huge factor, but where you are right now also plays a really, really huge role. Do you believe that you are at a stage in your life where you can have a conversation with your parents without quaking in your boots, without fearing what they will say or how they will react? Can you make your own decisions and walk away confident in those decisions? This is something that can be very difficult for most people because all the aunties and uncles will call this disrespect, but it's not. No one is saying you need to speak to your parents in an aggressive, rude tone or anything like that. But again, you should be able to have a calm, normal discussion with your parents and your family about your life, about your plans in life, about where you may agree or disagree without there being an uproar. And if this is something that is still very difficult for you, standing up for yourself in the outside world can also be quite hard, because that's the root of all your personality quirks and all your problems. So I think that's also something to work on, because usually people who have parents who are very domineering go one of either way. They either become the docile, I'm scared, and they fawn and they do whatever people want of them, or they become very sneaky, so they do whatever it is they want, but they just become a very good liar, or they become very angry and aggressive and they have a lot of rage because of how suppressed they've been. So this presents in so many different ways, but I think that's also something that needs to be addressed. So once you've conquered the fear of being judged, I think the next step is also the fear of your parents, which is something that you're going to need to extinguish when it comes to being able to stand up for yourself with people outside of your family. It's going to have to start with your family as well. You might also need to reassess your friendships. So there are so many people who are simply friends due to time. They grew up together, they're family friends, they all went to school together, and they still remain friends. And usually a lot of these people don't even like one another, but they remain friends because of familiarity. And I think sometimes it's okay to have some of those people as acquaintances, but they don't need to actually be part of your inner circle, especially when you don't have much respect for one another. So sift it out. Assess your friendships. Who's a real friend? Who's not a real friend? Who gives you genuine advice that's actually good for you? Who's always there for you when you actually genuinely need them, instead of those who siphon your energy? So you're going to have to assess your friendships. Don't be friends with people who bully you. A lot of people have friends that bully them, that steer them astray, give them really bad advice, never support them when they're winning. So you know more than anybody else who those people are, and you're going to have to cut them off, because really bad friends do either one of two things when you're going through something. When you have a good set of friends, they're going to support you, they're going to be there for you, they're going to defend you, they're going to give you good advice. But when you have really bad friends, they either encourage you to stay in situations that are really, really bad for you, or they might even introduce you to someone who ends up abusing you. Or you could even have friends who are never there for you when you need them. Your friendship has no foundation, so you can't go to them when you have a problem for support. And if you did go to those types of people, they'll probably give you really bad advice anyway. So you need a really, really good support system. So definitely reevaluate your friendships and only make sure you have people around you who look out for you and have the same intentions for you that you have for them. And I think that's one of the ways to avoid falling into the trap of any perpetrators or abusers in relationships, and not being a people pleaser in that relationship. Because sometimes some of the biggest people pleasers have like the bulldog friend, right, who stands up for them. You'll hear a lot of men talk about how, like, oh, they move to girls either in public or in other places in the public or in the club, and they have a friend who's like, she's not interested. To most men, that girl might come across as a hater, but we women appreciate that friend, because that friend might actually see that that man is a problem and is letting him know that, no, not my friend, stay away from my friend. So sometimes you do need friends who can see when others are trying to harm you and they stand up for you. And I think that's why I go back to Alyssa in the movie. She's his sister, but she's also Lily's best friend. And she's like, don't go back to him. He's my brother. I love him, but don't go back to him. That's a good friend. And so those are the type of people that you also need in your life. So the closest to you should not be the people you've known the longest. The closest to you should be the people who are the best for you, especially the type of people that you can lean on. The last thing I'll say on this topic, and maybe the most important, I don't know, between this and letting go of judgment, I don't know which one's more important, but I think they're very linked. It's that you must learn from your experiences. Most people, and to no fault of their own, to be honest, in this very fast-paced capitalist world, you barely have any time to get a sip of water and get enough sleep. And so I absolutely understand, but you need to always reassess your interactions and your relationships with people. It's something that I found is very, very, it's an invaluable thing. Learn from it. Learn from everything. If you can learn from others, great, but it's very important that you learn from your experiences, because if you don't, you're just going to keep doing the same things. You're going to keep meeting the same people in different skin, and the cycle will continue. So you must learn from your experiences, assess them, and usually you will find a pattern. Just look at, if you look at your friendships, look at the patterns of your friendships, look at your relationships within your family, your romantic relationships as well. If you are a single person right now, look at the last few relationships that you've had. You can probably find a pattern. Even if you're not dating the exact same types of people, the pattern within which you've dealt with them might be the same. And you have to look at it and be like, why do I do this? What do I gain from this? Why do I do things I'm uncomfortable with? Why do I never say no? Why don't I stand up for myself? Why? You need to learn. You need to learn. If not, you're going to keep on doing the same thing, and you might end up having a very resentful life that you don't deserve. So it's really important that you learn now so that you can save and protect yourself from the horrors of having to unpack that when you're older and when you have way less time. If you want a happy life, you need to start now. So assess. I think it's really important that you do that. And I don't think you will regret it if you do. Think about it. Take the time to go back and look at the choices that you've made. Look at the things that you've ignored. Try not to ignore those things ever again. Because I think usually the reason why most people allow predatory or abusive people in their lives is usually because of the fear of losing out. It's all the FOMO, man. Like, you think that you might have met a great person and you're never going to find something like that again. And so you allow a lot of things to fly. But the truth is, well, in my experience anyway, God has never taken anything away from me that He did not return double, triple fold. So you will get better, you will get more. It never stops there. I think sometimes the rewards that you get in life actually come from the things that you do let go. So don't accept unacceptable behavior due to fear. Better will come, your life will improve. Don't stick or remain in bad friendships, bad jobs, bad relationships because of fear, right? You can do it. You'll be fine, you'll be great. So I think let go, learn, and restart. That's the best thing I can do. You need to rise like a phoenix from the ashes. You will rise like a phoenix when you take a lesson from everything that happens in your life instead of allowing things to happen. You need to take charge of your life instead of you allowing life to happen to you. This life is your own. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. This has been a very long episode, but well deserved episode. For those of you who have stuck around and those of you who have checked in, I hope this was a very satisfying listen, and I hope you pop back in again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. This has been In Alignment with T. At this point, I don't know what number episode it is, but thank you for listening.